And joining us now, FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell. Administrator, 1 week after Hurricane Ida first made landfall on the Gulf Coast, how many FEMA workers do you still have on the coast and up in the Northeast, and how bad are conditions still?
Good morning, Chris. Thanks so much for having me on today. We still have well over 1,000 responders that are on the ground in Louisiana and several hundred more that have been supporting the events that happened in the Northeast. Hurricane Ida, she left a devastating path. Not only was it the fifth most powerful hurricane, but it impacted southern Louisiana as a Category 4 for hours. The road to recovery in that part of Louisiana is going to take a very long time. There's a lot of devastation.
You know, when a massive hurricane, you say a Category 4, hits the coast, we expect there to be severe damage. I think the surprise is that days later and more than 1,000 miles away, that Ida did such devastation in the Northeast, including New York City. And here is that city's mayor, Bill de Blasio, talking about that. Take a look.
I think we now understand that every attempt at projection, bluntly, is failing us. Let's be clear. We're getting from the very best experts projections that then are made a mockery of in a matter of minutes.
Question, why is that? Why are the projections so off?
You know, we are definitely beginning to see the impacts of climate change. This storm in particular, it intensified so rapidly in the Atlantic or in the Gulf that emergency managers, emergency responders had even a shorter time to warn the public and help get them out of harm's way. And we're also seeing, as this storm and some of the other weather events that we've seen, they're just intensifying very rapidly and dropping a large amount of rain and tornadoes. This is the crisis of our generation, these impacts that we're seeing from climate change. And we have to act now to try to protect against the future risks that we're going to face.
I want to put up, you talk about that, and it isn't just this week and Ida and the areas it hit. I want to put up a list of the extreme weather events we have had across the country this year, exceeding $1 billion in damages, each of them. Flooding, extreme cold, tornadoes, severe storms, wildfires, and, yes, hurricanes. Administrator, is this a normal run of disasters that this country faces in a year?
I think this is going to be our new normal. We saw intense weather events in 2017. Last year was a record number of hurricanes and a record wildfire season. The UN had just put out their climate report, and they said that this is the climate crisis that we're facing, and it's only going to continue to get worse.
I know that you're not a climate scientist, but let me ask you a question a lot of people ask. How can climate change do all of these things, be responsible for extreme heat and drought, but also record cold, flooding, as I say, and wildfires? How could it be responsible for all of those, sometimes what would seem to be directly contradictory weather effects?
You know, I don't know how climate impacts it specifically. What I do know is that we are seeing more frequent storms, more intense storms that are intensifying more rapidly. We have to start planning for what the future might hold and do modeling that's going to help us predict what these future risks are going to be.
Well, let's pick up on that, because if climate change is going to continue, and if these weather extremes, as they're called, are going to get worse, is FEMA, as it now exists, as the agency that you run, is it equipped to deal with a growing problem?
The focus that I really want to help FEMA move towards is focusing on reducing the impacts that we're seeing from these. We will continue to respond to these threats and these events as they happen, but we have to start investing in reducing the impacts that we're seeing from these. That's why this year President Biden has authorized close to $5 billion to invest in hazard mitigation to start reducing the impacts that we're seeing from this increased number of disastrous events.
But you know, we just showed the billions of dollars that each of these events have caused. I understand $5 billion even in Washington is real money, but it's nothing like what you're going to need to deal with if we're going to continue to see these kinds of strings of extreme weather events.
No, you're right, Chris, but this is a start. We have to start somewhere, and so this money is more than FEMA's ever been able to put out before, and we're going to continue to work on trying to find additional funding. The Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities grant program that was authorized by the Disaster Recovery Resilience Act is going to continue to give us larger amounts of money than we've ever had before. This is a start. We do have a long way to go and a lot of investment that needs to be made.
Well, let's talk about investment, because the Senate passed this $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure plan. I have to say, I studied a lot of stuff what's in it, but I didn't particularly study things that would help in terms of climate change. Are there elements in that bipartisan infrastructure plan that would protect parts of the country from extreme weather?
To my understanding, there are parts of that plan that are going to also contribute and add additional funding to the mitigation efforts. But the other part of that plan is helping to strengthen our infrastructure in general. We have a very old infrastructure across this country, and we need to work on rebuilding that, building it back stronger so it can be more resilient to these future threats.
This is going to get you probably a little more political than you want to get, Administrator, but this was passed last month, the infrastructure plan by the Senate. Now it's being held up in the House with a debate over another $3 trillion plan. If climate change and if weather extremes are such a clear and present danger, would you like to see, since even if you pass the bill today, it's going to take a while to get shovels in the ground, would you like to see this infrastructure plan pass sooner rather than later so that you can get going on this?
You know, the mitigation projects that need to be done, they are going to take time. We do need to start, though, right now, planning for what those projects are going to be and learning where we are going to invest our money to make sure that we are creating a more resilient infrastructure, more resilient communities. We've already started at FEMA with the $5 billion. This is just going to add additional capacity for us to really focus on the areas that need to be strengthened, because these threats aren't going to go away, and we need to start to reduce those impacts.
Yeah, I want to ask you a final question, less as the FEMA administrator and more as somebody who's dealt with a lot of these issues a long time. You've had quite a career. You spent 21 years as a firefighter in Colorado. You spent 2 years as the emergency management administrator in New York City. You've been the FEMA administrator since April. Is this country prepared for the worsening effects of climate change? Could you know, you hear about coastal areas that may be swamped. Could this country be transformed if we don't get a handle on climate change over the next decade?
You know, what I would say is it's an emergency management system. It takes everybody from the local, state, and federal level to make sure that we are working collectively to ensure we're ready for the disasters that come. So it's a combination of making sure that we're ready and we rely on each other to respond to these events, but also working together to invest in reducing the impacts. The only way that we're going to be able to continue to respond to this large number of weather events that we're seeing is to start to reduce the impacts that we're seeing from them.
But simple question, right now, are we ready?
I believe we're ready. We have invested a lot of money from the FEMA side into the state and local communities to enhance their preparedness. Our grant programs continue to invest in their capabilities to help them make sure that they are ready to respond.
Administrator Criswell, thank you. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us, and we'll be tracking the ongoing relief efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.